So I'm very excited to share this story with you today. My name, as you said, is Michael Santos, and I was born on January 15, 1964. 8,609 days later, on August 11, 1987, I walked outside of my condominium in Key Biscayne, and I found 3 federal agents waiting for me. They asked me to identify myself. I told them I was 23, and I told them my name, and as soon as I did, I felt them draw handguns and point them at my head. It's as if I could still feel the laser of their aim shifting right here. Now, I've never owned a handgun. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I was in the palm of my hand today. But in that flicker of time, I knew that I didn't like staring down the barrel of 3 pistols. So I didn't resist. I put my arms behind my back. I felt an agent come behind me. He slammed steel handcuffs around my wrists. And as he was leading me away, they told me that I was facing a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. So for the first time, I slept inside of a jail cell that night. I remember waking up on the concrete floor, putting my back against the steel bars, bringing my knees up to my chest in fear, and a tear streaming down my face as I wondered how this event was going to influence the rest of my life. Later, in the days to come, authorities locked me in chains and sent me to criminal justice proceedings in Miami. I later was locked in chains again and transported to holding cells in Seattle, where I faced criminal charges for the distribution of cocaine. And at the end of those criminal justice proceedings, my judge sentenced me to 45 years. I didn't know what that meant, to serve 45 years in prison. Later, I learned that if I avoided disciplinary infractions inside, I could satisfy that term in only 26 years. But having been only 23 years old, it didn't make sense to me. In any event, on August the 13th of 2012, only 8 months ago, I walked outside of a federal prison after 9,135 days inside. To put that into perspective, some of you, if we were to lock a man up today, and he was going to serve that same length of time, he wouldn't be walking out of prison until May 8th of 2038. Generations will have passed. During the quarter century that I served, our world evolved in extraordinary ways. I was locked up during the Kodak era. I've come to society in the Instagram era, an era I really don't understand. When I was inside, I had only one number to remember, 1637700, my prison registration number. Now I have so many passwords and email accounts that I really get lost every day. So the question, I think, is how does an individual advance his life and look forward to life when he's living in a world that's static, while the outside world is advancing in extraordinary ways? And I didn't know the answer to that, but I can tell you it begins with perspective. And ladies and gentlemen, today I'd like to share with you some of the ideas that carried me through the 9,135 days that I served, because I believe they're ideas worth spreading. I'd like to say they were my ideas, but as a great distinguished community member here from Silicon Valley once said, Steve Jobs, said, good leaders copy ideas, but great leaders steal ideas. And I stole ideas from some of the greatest leaders who ever lived. I'd like to tell you that in reading about people who confronted adversity, I found an enormous wealth of knowledge that could help me through my own journey. And by observing their behavior, observing how they confronted good times and bad times, I learned that adversity was something that we all experience as human beings. In my case, the adversity came as a consequence of the bad decisions that I made as a young man. But as we've heard from the very distinguished speakers that spoke earlier, sometimes adversity comes through no fault of our own, it just happens. But it's our response to adversity that determines the rest of our life. And I'd like to tell you that by observing that leadership and those ideas from other people, I was able to spin my own theory, my own recipe for success, for going through a struggle. And I called it my straight A guide. I'm so convinced that it can help anybody. I look forward to sharing it with you. But before I can talk about the straight A guide, I've got to take you back to the beginning. To those days after my conviction, but before my sentence, when I was still locked inside of the jail. because it was in that moment that I somehow stumbled across a philosophy book, an anthology. I didn't even know how to spell anthology at that time in my life. I certainly didn't know what it meant. But while flipping through those pages, a very thick book, I came across the story of Socrates. And I was inspired by him. For one reason, he was incarcerated just as I was. And as I read about his criminal trial, as I read about his conviction, and most importantly, as I read about his response to the death penalty that was inflicted upon him, I felt a great inspiration, and that caused me to transform my life. And it caused me to want to continue reading about others who encountered struggle in their life. And the more I read, the more I became convinced that it really is struggle, just a part of the human experience. We don't know when it's going to strike. We can have a great day today and tomorrow face struggle. And the reality is there is a way through that struggle if we only look to the leaders who've lived before us, or the leaders who live today with us, who live with us today. In fact, as I continued my pursuit of knowledge about people who've encountered struggle, I was led to the work of Mahatma Gandhi, an individual who really personifies struggle. But rather than complaining about it, every single day, Gandhi suggested that we should strive to become the change that we want to see in the world. It was the same message I really heard from Socrates, who said that he wanted to live with dignity rather than escape his punishment and die as a coward. I've heard that same message in the work of Viktor Frankl, a prisoner of the Nazis, who in his early days saw his family exterminated and never knew from one day to the next whether he was going to live or die. But rather than complain about his experiences, Viktor Frankl chose to create meaning in his life, and he did it through the service of others, by living a life of relevance. And so in that message, I also, again, heard the same message of Socrates, of living with dignity, of striving to be a man of courage. I heard that same message in the work of Nelson Mandela, in the work of so many people who encountered and lived through struggle, that regardless of what external influences are in our lives, if we set upon the path, we can always find a way to overcome. That was in the message of Friedrich Nietzsche, who specifically said that if a man can find a why in his life, he can always find the how to make it happen. I still didn't know the why in my life, but I knew that I would have a purpose to make it through this journey. And so later, authorities locked me in chains again and transported me from Seattle to the high security penitentiary in Atlanta, where I began serving my term, immersed in struggle, with violence and gangs and puddles of blood that I lived with every day. And I continued my kind of ethnographic research while I was inside of that penitentiary, asking guys who had served lengthy sentences what it was like, what was different in their life. And I remember speaking with a guy, I'll call him Wolf, an inveterate gang leader who had been incarcerated for about 20 years. And I asked him, how was his life different from the time that he walked into the penitentiary? And Wolf said, well, wherever I go, any prison yard I walk on, people are going to hold me in respect. But ladies and gentlemen, I would submit to you that the term respect has a very different connotation in a high security penitentiary than it means out here. Out here, we earn respect by educating ourselves, by being good family men, by being community leaders, much like I'm sure each of you in this audience. But in the penitentiary, it's an entirely different aura, entirely different environment, where respect is earned by carrying a knife and a cold ball of hate in your gut. And ironically, as I listened to this message from an inveterate gang leader in a penitentiary, talking about how proud he was that he could walk on any penitentiary yard, I heard the same message of Gandhi, Socrates, Frankl. That may sound strange, but what it was these guys in prison, they had found the why in their life. They were totally comfortable living in a prison environment. And I just had to recognize then, I don't want to live in prison. I want to define the why in my life of being able one day to emerge from prison and stand before an audience like this of community leaders who strive to make society better. And I wonder, how can I do that? So I try to project into the future. And I would look to people like you and I'd say, what would you expect of an individual who is serving a lengthy time in prison? Is there anything that individual can do to earn your respect, to be seen as something more than the bad decisions of his past? And I came away with an answer. The answer was yes, I think that there is. That led me to 3 principles. Number 1, you'd expect that individual to educate himself. Number 2, you'd expect that individual to contribute to society in meaningful, measurable ways. Number 3, you would expect that individual to build a support network of people who believed in him. Because if you could build a support network of people who believed in him and that you respected, it might be easier for others in society to buy in and look at something more than the bad decisions of an individual's past. And that became my principled, deliberate approach for growing through struggle. It was a values-based, goal-oriented approach, and it led to my straight A guide. Again, I said I'd like to say I invented it myself, but it's really not. It's something that I'm sure that every leader lives by. It begins with attitude. You can measure your attitude by your commitment to success as you or I or anyone else defines success. Since I could see myself 25 years ago standing not inside of a penitentiary, but in front of an audience like this, sharing my story of the journey with hopes that others might find value in the message, I had a reason to go on. I could find the how because I knew the why. And so that led to the second A of my straight A guide, to have an aspiration, a vision of how I would define success in every area of my life. And because I could see that vision in terms of my educational growth, in terms of my fitness, in terms of my contributions to society, in terms of the support network that I was striving to build, I could move on to the third A in my straight A guide, which was action. I could take incremental action steps that would lead me from where I was to the person that I wanted to become. And that empowered me through each of the 9,000 days. But I knew that the prison system would not recognize it. It would make no difference to prison authorities whether I focused on preparing myself for success upon release or whether I spent my time watching television and keeping up with the Kardashians. Made no difference. So I had to create my own source of accountability. And that was the fourth A in my straight A guide, to have clearly defined accountability metrics that would define success and put timelines within that success so that as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into years and the years turned into decades, I could keep focused on my drive, on what I wanted to become rather than what the environment I was in said that I was. And that led to my fifth A in my straight A guide, which was to become aware of opportunities that I could seize. Opportunities that were available to everybody around me, but not everybody seized upon them. And by becoming aware of those opportunities and seizing them and executing my plan, I could simultaneously make the marketplace aware of me. And the more people who became aware of me, the more people who stepped up to help me and project me along my path. That led to my sixth A, which was achievement, celebrating every achievement along the way. And finally, the seventh A, appreciation, expressing gratitude for the enormous amount of resources that came my way, for the number of people who came to help me along my journey. And that was my straight A guide. It helped me transition after a quarter century of prison in ways that very few people would have expected. I had opportunities to educate myself inside because of this path. I earned an undergraduate degree from Mercer University, a master's degree from Hofstra University. I was enrolled while I was in prison in a PhD program until a warden blocked me from continuing on with my education. But that didn't stop me. My vision continued, and I went into publishing, and I published books that have reached tens of thousands of people across the world. And I've been able to contribute. Through that contribution to society, I've had people tell me how I've helped their understanding of the criminal justice system and why we need to reform that criminal justice system, because it affects every individual in this room, whether you know it or not. And simultaneously, while creating that level of awareness, people came into my life, including a woman whom I married inside of a prison visiting room 10 years ago. And through the opportunities I created, I was able to support my wife while in an environment that was far more stark than this, with far less friendly eyes beaming on me all the time. of prison guards. We were never outside of a room in front of others. But yet we nurtured a love that continues through this day. And through my work, I was able to support her and pay taxes and emerge from federal prison with enough financial resources that would enable me to start my career of showing others how to overcome struggle, how to overcome adversity. In fact, when I walked out of prison, I not only had a magnificent wife and extraordinary opportunities, including this one, but I had a job waiting for me from one of the great employers of this Northern California community. Employs several hundred people, generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, and every day I have the privilege of being to coach this CEO of a great company, Golden State Lumber, telling him, hey, there's always adversity in our life, there's always struggle, but there is also always a way to overcome it. Whether that adversity is change in the marketplace, whether that adversity is struggle with fitness goals, whether that adversity is a health issue, there is always a way through. And I consider it my job, and I feel extraordinarily impassioned about sharing this message with the rest of society, because I am convinced that success is measured not by the achievements that we achieve in good times, but by the way we overcome struggle when it strikes. The path that guided me through prison is no different from the path that guides people to success in every area, including building an extraordinary business like this. It all begins with attitude, with a clearly defined commitment to success, with incremental action steps, with accountability logs, with awareness, and with never losing sight of allowing us as individuals to define success in our lives, rather than allowing external influences or bad decisions of the past or anything else to determine where we are tomorrow. We can always strive to become something better than our past. That has been my mission and my passion, and I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to share it with a distinguished audience of TEDx, and I want to thank you guys for this opportunity.